So it will be Burnley, Sheffield United and Luton playing in the Premier League next season. I thought we'd have an incredibly early look at the relegation odds for the Premier League next season to see just where the bookies are currently placing each of the newly promoted Championship clubs in the general landscape of the Premier League heading into next season. Now, of course, it is way too early to be looking into any of this sort of thing, but I thought it would be an interesting one to look into how the bookies currently see it and compare it to the start of the season, when each of those Championship clubs has had the chance to go ahead and make some transfers, and see just then if the bookmakers give them a better chance of survival. I'd like to hear from you Luton, Burnley and Sheffield United fans. Which are the key areas that you think you'll need to look into in terms of recruitment if you are going to stick it in the Premier League? And we'll also be discussing some of the other sides who just about avoided, and we'll also be discussing some of the other Premier League sides who just avoided relegation this season, and see where the bookmakers currently have them placed. If you do go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. Without any further ado, let's jump in. So it'll come as no surprise to learn that Luton are the bookmakers' favourites for relegation in the Premier League next season. I think that Luton will thrive on that underdog tag, really. By far and away the favourites to be relegated as things stand, and there is going to be a lot of work that needs to be done in that Luton squad to get them up to Premier League standard, as well as a few other things off the pitch which obviously everyone's talking about in terms of the stadium and things like that. I actually think home form could turn out to be crucial for Luton next season, because it is one of those intangibles where I just see them making it a little bit of a fortress next season. I do see them catching out some big Premier League sides really off guard down at Kenilworth Road. It's such a unique experience there where the crowd is basically spilling onto the pitch. It's that close to the action. But of course a lot of work is needed in terms of that overall recruitment. Speaking of key loanees that will be returning to their parent clubs, the right wing back situation will need to be addressed, the goalkeeping situation, and in holding midfield as well. Marvellous Nakamba, arguably their most important player in that second half of the season, along with Lockyer and Carlton Morris. I definitely think there is a case to be made that teams go up to the Premier League that, you know, tend to fare better, that are that little bit more defensively savvy and a little bit more physical, and Luton certainly have that in abundance. We see how Brentford, for instance, have done really well to adapt to Premier League football by adding that solid spine to their squad and that bit of physicality, and Luton do have a little bit of that to their game as well. So I'm by no means writing them off at this stage, but you can see why the bookies would have them as the favourites for relegation. I think that's often the case with the team that does get promoted via the playoffs and is deemed to be the weakest, I suppose, of the three coming up. 19th place at the moment, the bookmakers then have Sheffield United, and this one, once again, not as a massive surprise, mostly due to off the field issues, and this could spill into this Premier League season, and why maybe a few Blades fans are a little bit pensive coming back up to this level. Obviously, last time we saw Sheffield United in the Premier League, that first season under Wilder, absolutely miraculous. Second season, when they didn't nail the recruitment, things took a turn for the worse. The problem that Sheffield United have at the moment is the talk of a takeover rumbling on in the background, and whether or not that will be finalised, materialised in these next few weeks and months, and how long that story is actually going to rumble on for, that will have an influence on the recruitment and the players they are able to bring in, and ultimately will affect how competitive they are next season. So without knowing all of the ins and outs in terms of the takeover, it's tough to make a prediction on them at the moment as well. And the third favourite to be relegated as of right now is Bournemouth. They really did defy the odds this season in the Premier League. I, like the vast majority of people, did have them to be relegated at the start of the season. You know, it was a Scott Parker side originally, where we didn't see all that much recruitment originally when the Premier League season did kick off, and we just thought, how competitive is this squad really going to be? But full credit to Gary O'Neill and that group of players who have shown that there is, you know, real Premier League quality woven throughout that squad. You can see why the bookmakers do have them down there at the moment. Bournemouth have actually done really well to defy a lot of the underlying numbers this season, come up with big match-winning performances at crucial points of the season. In terms of the XG difference, so the difference between the amount of XG you accumulate and the XG against, Bournemouth have actually been the worst team in the Premier League this season in terms of having the biggest difference between XG and XG against. So if there is a regression to those underlying numbers next season, you can see why maybe the bookmakers do have them in that 18th spot at the moment. Along with that, they've also got a massive void to fill in terms of Jefferson Lerma, with his contract running out and him leaving at the end of the season. getting a combative holding midfielder in the Lerma role will be no easy feat for Bournemouth, but they've defied the odd once, and I feel like getting over that original hurdle was probably the toughest thing to do, and building upon that now, there's every chance they go ahead and do that. And based on the bookies' odds at the moment, they do have Burnley surviving in the Premier League. The bookies got them in 17th at the moment based on the relegation odds, with slightly better survival odds than that of Bournemouth. Now, like I think a lot of people would, I do think Burnley will be the best performing of the three newly promoted Championship sides, but still a long way to go in terms of the recruitment for next season in the Premier League. Just feel like with that group of players, and yes, they need to add to it, especially with the loanees going back to their parent clubs, but a manager with a ceiling as high as I believe Vincent Kompany to have, how dominant they were in the Championship at times, along with being really clever in the transfer market, and it looks like there's a real fun there to go ahead and back Kompany in the Premier League as well. And also the history, you know, Burnley are one of a select few Championship sides to have accumulated over 100 points in the Championship, and of those sides who have accumulated 100 points or more, none of them have ever been relegated in their first season up in the Premier League, and I think that history right there bodes very well for this Burnley squad. In at 16th we then have Nottingham Forest, so the bookies are predicting them to survive, and I feel like Forest, I mean, they had to get over this hurdle, this first season back in the Premier League, with the amount of players coming in, the money they spent on that squad, they had to get over that original hurdle. And I do see quite a few parallels between Forest and Aston Villa when they were promoted, and when they, you know, had that first season up in the Premier League. It was a real struggle for them, and they just about limped over the line in the end. They spent a lot of money, and you know, the same conversations were being had about Villa. You know, what would happen if that squad was then to be relegated in the Championship, and the sort of players that would have to be picked apart, and FFP coming into it and all those sorts of things. But we've seen from that point how Villa have built upon the foundations of that first Premier League season being survival. I truly can see Forest going in a similar sort of direction. Feels like the only way is up for Forest at the moment, but once again they're going to have to nail the recruitment. But they've got the reward for backing and sticking with Steve Cooper. I think that's really to be respected. Will second season syndrome affect Fulham? The bookies do have them having a slight regression next season based on the current relegation odds, accumulating all of them and putting them into the table. The bookies currently have Fulham placed 15th for next season. We saw an ever so slight tail off in the final couple of months of the season from Fulham, but overall it's been an absolutely fantastic season. I truly think that Marco Silva is right up there as a manager of the season candidate. 10th place to finish for Fulham in the end. No sort of relegation fears, as the vast majority of us thought there might be there at the start of the season, but they, similar to Brentford, I think have the foundations now of a really solid Premier League spine of players, which I anticipate them to add towards in the summer. They've got a really good manager, and as long as he's not poached away by any of the big boys, I think that Fulham are in a really good place at the moment. Now, I found this one quite interesting. The bookies have Everton all the way up in 14th at the moment based on the relegation odds. It's 2 consecutive seasons where Everton have just scraped by in terms of Premier League survival, and with the bottom of the Premier League getting ever more competitive year upon year, it does feel as if Everton are just about getting away with it. But there becomes a point in time where if you're not improving with the curve of the rest of the league, you will be caught out by that. And with the underlying factors still very much rife at the club, you know, there's been, you know, rumblings of the background, potential point deductions that could come in for next season in terms of profit and sustainability rules being breached by Everton and things like that. I'm a little bit more apprehensive, or at least I certainly would be, to have them all the way up in 14th at the moment based on the relegation odds for next season. A few clubs who the bookies currently have placed below them, I think I'd bump Everton down quite a few places at the moment based on where I think they are at the moment. There is a little bit more stability there now with Sean Dyche, but even he has struggled to get the maximum out of this squad at the moment, with potentially another tough summer to come ahead as well. Everton have just got by in recent years, but there becomes a point where that sort of luck does run out. In at 13th, the bookies then have Brentford. Few people thought that the Bees may suffer second season syndrome. You know, a lot of people saw Christian Eriksen being a big part of that squad from last season and him no longer being there this time around. But under Thomas Frank, Brentford just continue to go from strength to strength, and they are on that miraculous rise at the moment, you know, similar to a Coventry City or whatever, where, you know, just season upon season they're getting continually better in terms of finishes. And there does become a point where that does top out, and you know how much further can you continue to overachieve. And the big thing with Brentford next season, or at least for the start of the season up until January, will be the fact that they will be missing Ivan Toney. But generally speaking, in terms of clubs in England, there aren't many who I'd back to be better in the transfer window than Brentford in terms of getting value for money, finding a hidden gem and really developing and bringing them up. They are the masters at that. So 4-1 relegation odds, by that the bookies are fairly confident that they will survive. After that, in 12th, the bookies have Wolves relegation odds 5-1. Now on the surface of things at the end of this season, I think Wolves do look like they are in a decent position with Lopetegui, the uplifting form that they've seen since he's come in. They've been practically playing like a top half side, and let's not forget that there was the real fear of relegation at Molineux prior to his arrival. A few rumblings from behind the scenes though does make me a little bit nervous that they could be dragged into something potentially next season. You know, if that Ruben Neves sale is expected to go through like we believe at the moment, they've also got contracts expiring for the likes of João Moutinho, Diego Costa and Adama Traore, and Lopetegui has already spoken about the FFP issues that Wolves potentially face this summer and the hardships that obviously potentially come along with that as well. So for whatever reason, if he was to decide to leave as well and leave Wolves with those issues and they didn't get that next managerial hiring spot on, I could see them being in a little bit of trouble. But with him at the club and the current squad, they look alright, but feels like a big summer there at Molineux. And then finally, for the purposes of today's video, the bookies then have Crystal Palace. Now Palace are an interesting one. I mean, they are the definition of solidity in the Premier League. I think that's now 10 consecutive seasons that Palace have had in the Premier League. Prior to Hodgson coming in, it looked like maybe they could have been dragged into something, but he very much got them over the line in the end. And those 10 years of consistency have been absolutely miraculous in terms of the league finishes. They fluctuated from between 10th and 15th, never finishing any higher than 10th, never finishing any lower than 15th. And the bookies see that trend continuing here. They've got them placed in 11th at the moment. Now, the big thing with Palace is Wilfried Zaha expected to leave by all accounts at the end of the season. No contract has been finalised with him to stay at Palace as of recording, and that will be an absolutely huge blow. But with the other players that Palace have coming through, how well they have done in picking up some of those gems, particularly from the EFL over these past few years, I do think they've got the edge on quite a few of the sides who are predicted to finish below them at the moment. But those are the bookies' odds for how they see the Premier League table shaping up going into next season. Of course, we've got a hell of a long summer to go and transfer window, and all these odds will fluctuate, but it will be interesting to see come the start of the season how much those odds have actually changed and if we do see massive movements between any of the sides in there. But guys, if you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. If you would like to see a bit more regular Premier League content relating to the likes of Luton, Sheffield United and Burnley, then do show your support on today's video. Apart from that though guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.